think let me just pass it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And it's really lovely to see so many people's faces. Here is the book. It was out just a week or two ago. I was actually in Nigeria working with state government there at the time. So I had a sort of impromptu book launch in Nigeria, but it's lovely to be here more properly. Now I'm back in UK, which is where I'm based most of the time. And I don't have slides. I just wanted to share a little bit about what this book is about, why I thought it was important enough to write, what I think it can help potentially some of you with, or with readers with generally, and then really open it out. So if anything I've said resonates, it's a problem you're experiencing, then I'm really happy that we use some of this time to bounce ideas around and share tips and advice with each other. So I would start by saying there are so many books about design, about product management, about service design, about digital transformation, and about agile. And this is not one of them, or not exactly anyway. Most of us, I think, who work with the larger organizations, especially those that sort of predate the internet, they were already there, the governments, the telcos, the banks, finance companies, utility companies, like all of those sorts of organizations. I think any of us who have worked with them will already know what happens when you try to make good products and services. You hit up against the traditional ways that these organizations work. And that doesn't magically change just because you establish one beacon team or one agile team that everyone else is meant to sort of magically learn from. Or, you know, even a user-centered design team, like by itself, it doesn't change how the rest of the organization works. And what actually gets in the way is not that we don't know how to make good products and services. It's everything about the organization and how it works. So the governance, how work and money flows through an organization, the leadership and team structures, the planning cycles and expectations about reporting, which don't necessarily match what our kind of delivery teams want to be doing. So at one level, this book is a playbook for how to build the foundations for what the organizations behind successful products and services look like. So it's a distillation of knowledge, expertise, and very practical hands-on tools learned from dozens of teams and organizations and hundreds of services. It includes sort of very practical examples. And I think it's because I believe that although these organizations are huge and complex, I believe there are practical, doable steps that we can all take to change our organizations in some pretty fundamental ways. And that the answer is sort of doing it together with others, not one special team or separate profession doing it to another. So really, at another level, this book is about having personal influence, currency, and growing power within an organization. Not by sort of dominating or having, you know, the right idea beyond anyone else, but by knowing what you can do, what you can try, how to go about learning about the big questions, and what to do as you face the various challenges which we already know come up. We already know what they are, and in a way that includes everybody and wins support for yourself and what you're trying to do as you go. So my hope is that it gives readers a way to have an amplified influence as they work among their organizations. And just to mention what it covers, sort of each chapter will take a specific problem that we already know comes up, so planning or governance, and gives really practical things that anybody could try this week. It doesn't require you to have special, you know, executive positions or explicit permission. It just says, here's a thing to try, have a go. If that doesn't work, find this person, talk to them, have this conversation. It's literally that kind of, doesn't matter who you are, these are the things that you can do and try. And I'll just finish there by saying it's not just You know, it's not, well, none of it is just ideas or theory. All of it is grounded from very hands-on experience. And it also includes like dozens and dozens of practical case studies. So the NHS England talk about how they were delivering the vaccination service during the COVID pandemic while designing and figuring out their operating model at the same time. Or the Passport Office is talking about how they've established leadership that looks across whole services and how they've ended up organising their whole organisation around that idea of having sort of one end-to-end service. So I will pause there, but that gives you a flavour of why, what it covers, the kind of problems that I think haven't been addressed yet, and hope that it saves some people working with large organisations some time and frustration in giving practical ideas to try.
All right. Very good. Thank you very much, Kate. I love how you just jumped into the book. I have my own copy here too, and maybe one of the first copies in Denmark. I noticed that the foreword is actually written by somebody from Toronto. Can you just perhaps mention a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Hilary Hartley is a digital leader who's worked in governments at many different levels. So she was part of establishing some of the US digital service and an organization called 18F, who were kind of like the US equivalent of what we had here in the UK, which was the government digital service. And then since then, she moved on to Canada, and Canada are also doing brilliant things in terms of transformation, using digital technology, design, user-centered approaches to look at their public services. So part of why I wanted to invite Hilary, who was really kind and generous in what she said, but it's to say that this isn't just a sort of UK or European set of problems. Like, all of the governments and the big institutions are kind of coming to the same point where they've probably got a digital team or part of the organization, or a technology part. They've probably got some good teams doing some agile work, doing some building good services. That hasn't necessarily translated to the rest of the organization yet. So it's a shared endeavour. And like I said, I was in Nigeria just last week, similarly working with a part of the state government there. So I think these issues are very much global.
All right, very good. If anybody else has questions, comments, please jump in. You can use the chat, or if you are a regular user of Teams, you can also use that raise hand feature, which makes my life a little bit easier. I like from the forward this quote on, like, it was, I think, a presentation that you gave on the actual problems to be solved. I think this is something that I come back to often in meetings. Like, what is the problem we're actually trying to solve here?
Yeah.
When I read through then the headings of all the chapters, it struck me, like you said earlier, like a playbook for how to build a foundation. Like we have, I think many people on the call have probably already read something about winning support from people at the top, or positioning teams around services, or establishing whole service leadership. But then I think what you said about having practical examples and doable steps, I think is really valuable. Is there perhaps, letting you guide a little bit as the author, Kate, is there perhaps like a specific chapter we could dive into, like a chapter that's in particularly a favorite of yours? Or
yeah, I'm sure there is. I just maybe people could just raise their hands, but who here is working in an organization that's either something to do with the public sector, or that delivers services direct to end users? I mentioned we have Caroline, that's one. We mentioned someone else in local government.
Yeah, we have quite a few here also on the agency side. I think we have perhaps quite a few people here joining also from Toronto or from London. I see you, Ben. Good to see you there.
Okay, that's great. So I think as the book goes on, I think the chapters get more interesting because they get more stuck into the really hard stuff. So I think the first half of the book is a grounding in how to define the services of your organization, how to think about it in terms of the different steps that are common throughout services, how to define, like how to move from somebody giving you a very fixed brief of build this portal for me to what's needed to improve the services that we offer. So there's kind of practical steps in how to go about that. I think would apply to anybody, whether you work for a consultancy, whether you're working in-house. And then later on, the book gets to, okay, like some of the really tough stuff. So what do you do when you are working with an organization and there's a giant program of transformation, let's say, and they kind of put up in front of you the most complicated plan you've ever seen in your life that stretches out over a couple of years and includes incredibly detailed milestones and exact dates when specific bits of technology were delivered. And there's no reference to how you'll know if any of this is working or even what the point of it is in the first place. What do you do if you're in that situation and you're the one trying to make a good product, a better service, and so on? So one of the chapters looks at this, activity about planning, and unpicks the fact that often what's going on is not really planning at all, but it's a form of assurance, reassurance for leadership that other people know what they're doing. And it's got nothing to do with, or less to do with actually what's needed to make the thing you're doing successful, and more to do with, can leadership from afar, working at a distance, feel reassured that someone's managing whatever's going on there? And that's why it becomes part of a much bigger cultural change, because often what we're trying to do is actually move leadership closer to the work that's actually happening, or the people that are using the products and services. And that's not necessarily a shared view of what leadership want to happen. So there's one chapter on planning, and just as an example, we recommend to just make a simpler plan. So it doesn't matter if there's a really complicated plan existing that everyone's really wedded to, just make a really simple plan over 3, 6, 9 months. Put what you want to learn on it, because that's a little way of shifting how you fix away from sort of fixed milestones. So really high level, and because it will be easier to understand than anybody else's complicated plan, you can sort of present it alongside, but it starts to become the way in for other people to understand what the work is actually doing and what it's about. So it's a way of starting to let go of the need for very detailed certainty that's probably false, towards shaping, what we actually need to learn. What can we be more certain about? It's not like we're saying we can't know anything. There are some things we can be certain about, and there are some things that we're going to need to do some work before we can be certain. And a good, simple plan can capture that and expose the differences. So that's one chapter.
Great, thank you. I saw a raised hand from Jeanette Clement. Did you want to say something, or did you just want to clarify that you were delivering services, Jeanette?
I was just putting my hand up to say I deliver services to people in a complex organisation. But yeah, I'm a big long-term fan of Kate's work, and highly advocate watching all of their Vimeos on different talks. I did have a question. Like for a few years at BT, we've part of the work that we've been doing is trying to change the language of the organisation to be more user-centred, and trying to help them to understand that we are a service provider, and naming things as those things as our end users understand them. But there seems to be like a tipping point you get to, so we can sort of help people that are measuring things, help maybe even like directors understand the value of that. But then beyond that, when you go into parts of the organisation, they feel almost like untouchable, and you get to that point. I had a conversation yesterday with someone that was reporting on performance. I was like, it would be great if you use this language that we've defined as part of our journey framework. And I was like, but if I go into those meetings with this language, they won't know what I'm talking about. If I say buy broadband, they understand that as BB acquisition something. And And it's like, how have you got any tips of how you get into those parts that feel like untouchable in the organization? Because it's really hard to have that holistic view and be able to triage those performance metrics as well as like usability and analytics if you don't get that shared language.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I should also say, for the benefit of everybody, Jeanette shared a really awesome example of how BT are looking at or thinking about services and looking at patterns, and it's in the book in one of the chapters, and it's like Jeanette and her team are doing awesome work at BT, so I'm a massive fan.
We're trying.
But yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? And I suppose in one sense, if we're thinking about language, it's because that we believe that by having a common language, it will help us to ... work better together, achieve something better together on behalf of our customers or on behalf of our business. So there can sometimes be, and you will know this, but there can sometimes be a way in which can let go of the precise language. They might be talking to internal other teams, and perhaps it doesn't matter so much whether those people have the same language or words for it. If you can share the idea that it's worth keeping a sense of how whatever performance metric you're looking at ladders up or relates to something that's fundamentally really important. So even if you don't get to the bit where they're thinking of it as like buying broadband or using a telephone service or whatever the thing is, they're having the sense of kind of where things fit. The fact that there is some sort of bigger end-to-end thing that's centered around users, even if you don't quite get to the language, I suppose is, can be good enough. Because it's so hard, isn't it? Like if they'd been doing a ton of work on their own language and then they came to you and were like, Jeanette, can you call it BBF acquisition, something or other? You're like, oh, no. But if there's some sort of shared concept behind it, even if it's not quite the language yet, I guess that's a good start. But
I think the compromise we reach is like we'll have the user-centered language in brackets afterwards. So
the same arguments had, I think, for a lot of government content. So, for example, moving away from calling something an SORN or a V50 or a V45, and see like Caroline smiling there. Like there is the real battle, isn't there, around instead calling it, what to do if you want to take your car off the road, or applying to work in the UK, not applying for an F105 form statutory term, using that kind of government language. And for some time, people had to include like the old language with the new, because some people knew the old language and that's what they'd searched for, but we're trying to move away from the fact or the need for everybody to. And yeah, can you use them alongside? Can you drop them in time? Is it more of a conceptual understanding that's needed?
Very good. Thank you, Jeanette. Good to see you. Thank you, Kate. This brought me also to the subtitle of the book. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about this sustainably part.
Yeah, sure. And that's also a word that means lots of different things, doesn't it? I think really here I'm focused on how do you make this not just a one-off? So, like as an agency or a consultancy, you come in and often you are working on a sort of one-off initiative, or at least a one-off piece of time. It's a 3-month or a 6-month piece of work, and you deliver it, and you want to make sure that whatever you've done, your client can then carry on doing themselves, that it doesn't die a death, it doesn't get stuck somewhere, it doesn't get superseded by something else that doesn't actually achieve the same goal. So in the one sense, it's how do we build the sort of capability, the processes, the people, the ways of working that make some of this a default, so that instead of being us as an individual trying to make stuff happen within our organization, it becomes the way that organization does things by default, that the way that all of the structures work means that everybody else is positioned to make better services, because that's just how things work. It doesn't have to be such a battle. So I mean sustainably in terms of how do we change the way our governance processes work? How do we establish leadership? How do we structure teams? How do we change the approach to planning? How do we push back on reporting expectations? How do we shape each piece of work that we start? And how do we determine what we should be doing more of or less of? Like all of that changes so that the whole thing is sustainable, because it's just how things work.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Feel free to jump in. One of the things that I like to ask also when we have time at these book launches is if you could just perhaps reveal a little bit from behind the scenes in terms of like how did you get the book together, like the writing process?
Yeah, good question. And I like encourage everybody to, I think Jeff Gottelf calls this develop their public presence. So it's not like your personal brand or something. I don't know what that means, but just talking about the work that you are doing, or the work that you've seen someone do that you think is kind of cool or interesting, and noticing the moments where you find yourself saying the same thing to someone more than once because it was useful or helpful or practical. Or if you find yourself feeling angry about something, it's also another good sense that you might need to write about it. And I say that because the way this book started is because I started writing about work teams were doing, writing about things which came up time and time again in the organizations I was working with, in the hope that, well, if at least, 3 people come across this blog post and that saves 3 people a couple of weeks or a bit of frustration, that to me is worth it. So it started off very much that way. And then over time, I had, a body of work and I began to see some patterns in it. And, that was the basis of a book I laughingly thought naively at the start. And I'm sure everybody says, and everybody knows, many of you have written books that are on this call, but the sheer, the going around the houses, I think I probably wrote 1 million words to get to the 60,000 that are in this book. Again and again and again.
Very good.
Yeah.
So when people on the call have their own copy of the book, now they have like a special insight to how it got together. Perhaps one more thing I think that will make the reading experience something special is there anything like that, from the 1 million words to the 60,000, is there like one specific thing that you could share as a secret with us that didn't make it into the book?
That's a good question. There are lots of things that did not make it into the book. I think.
Any specific darling you had to kill? Like the editor said, take this out. This leads nowhere.
No, I think that was me being fairly harsh on myself, actually, that led to that process. I think one thing that I'm not sure if it comes in the book or not, but I'm hoping it's written fairly compassionately, in that I'm not pretending for 1 minute that you can just read this book, carry out these things, get it all done in a week. And if you don't achieve it, then it's your fault, you're not good enough, and so on, because it's really hard, particularly if you don't have huge teams and lots of allies around you. This stuff, like changing an organization or working within an institution that doesn't match or doesn't see things the way you do, is hard, it's stressful, people can get burned out. So I don't know if that comes across enough in the book. I hope it does. But I would also say, as much as I say, I do believe that we can all do things, have a huge impact, I also say, take note if you're in environments where that's just not going to be possible, people are too dogmatically wedded to the complete opposite and are not in any way curious, or it's unhealthy, take that on board as well. It's not necessarily just you all of the time. So there we go.
Very good. Thank you, Kate. Any other closing questions? What comes next, Kate? Is a big book tour?
There are probably places that I would like to go and visit, and talks and various conferences coming up. I'm really hoping to do more. So I've been doing some guest lecturing everywhere from Harvard University to UCL fairly recently. We will be developing training and workshops later on this year. So if people are interested in following up, just get in touch. We can put you on the list for when things come out or are available. And that's really to come alongside and help people do this within their organizations and help them develop their plans for how to function, how to make it happen.
All right.
Yeah. But otherwise,
good. So that was on you on the book launch. Perhaps the normal stereotypical question to wrap these things up is also a look into the future in general for services organizations. I know it's hard to predict the future, but given your experience, Kate, would you mind trying?
Sure. I think when thinking about for example, what's happening in terms of like technology and AI and things like that, that's got big implications for, I think, how services operate. At least many people will think it does. So how that changes things, like I already hear of people like answering customer queries now using ChatGPT rather than any kind of human one, even though it appears to be from a human. I think that's quite interesting. So I think all of that said, I believe that the fundamentals don't change. So what people generally need, how you know whether something works for people or not, how to kind of get to the outcome and use that to organize the work. So I think I see change in terms of the technology and other things available to us in terms of how we support services. I think there's real consistency, and we can use as an anchor how they actually work for people, whether they work for people, whether that's getting better or worse, and then what the ongoing impact is on the efficiency and the effectiveness of the organizations that provide it. So I think some things will just hold true 10, 15, 20 years into the future. A lot about how we deliver stuff may change, at least for some of our audiences.
Perfect. Thank you. We made it right on time. I think we started a minute late, but we'll finish right on time. Thank you, Kate. And like Carolyn and others said in the beginning, congratulations on the book. And thank you for taking the time to share more about it with us. I really appreciate it.